So moving forward, we'll concentrate on the rear suspension and the rear drives. So the first part is these housings here. Now, I think I said in the review of the kit that there's actually a chain drive in here for the two drive hubs, but that's not correct. There's gears. It comes from the half shaft to each of the wheels. It drive the main wheels. So these parts here, the two halves of the components, they went together really nice and cleanly and positively and cleaned up very nice. The thing to watch out for is to make sure you assemble them correctly. So the first one I did, I made sure I was following the diagram and it came out fine. The second one, I thought I was following the diagram, but I actually put these on the wrong ends. So the drive hubs here was on the wrong side. Luckily I was able to break them off because the glue hadn't fully set. Swap them over and then re-glue them. When I glued them up, I actually just fitted these dry, which is the wheel hubs. And then while the glue was still soft, just held them down flat on the mat, just to make sure they were in line. Also part of that is this bracket here. And then that glues onto there. But I'll show you how I'm going to glue this up shortly. And then there's a number of various bits and pieces, which once I've kind of finalized everything, I'll glue them on last. So that's these parts here. Also is for joining the parts together, which is on the other page. You've got this part here, and then that fits through the springs, this drive hubs, and then into the differential. It's actually a very nice moulding. It's very simple, but I don't know, something about it's very nice. So that actually, you can see the recess here. So on the trial fit, it actually sat a bit proud because the diameter was just a wee bit too big. So what I did was, using just a very fine, it's 1200 grit, I just span it on with my fingers, and it took very little passes for it to now sit properly flush. So in real life, just this dome here is a cover only. It's not connected to the shaft, so it's just a cover to cover the half shaft bearings, and this would be, I guess, the equivalent to the half shaft. So now I've made up these, next thing was to do a test fit, and it went in there very nicely. Then onto the leaf spring suspension. Again, test fitting it before I do final assembly, and that's, you might hear it, it's quite a nice tight fit. And then also through from this end, this bracket here, and again, it's a nice tight fit. So that's that parts. The other parts were the differential. And again, that went together relatively well. A couple of points to watch out for. This here, which is shown there, that connects to this top cover first before you join it onto the two halves of the diff. I actually put these three together and then I couldn't get this to go in. Luckily, I managed to push it in on its side at an angle and then turn it and lift it. So just be wary of that. There's a couple other bits to go on. Again, once it's all finalised, I'll glue them on. I did need to do a wee bit of filling with milliput just in this joint here. And there was a big scuff here off the sprue, so I don't know how that happened, but a wee bit of smear of milliput was enough for that. So I'm just checking the half shaft again. It's quite a loose fit, but it doesn't go in far, but it'll be enough anyway. So that's that part. What I also did was, on the frame, get this the right way around, I just checked the connection there where that joins. So it's a wee bit loose, but that's okay. Once it glues on, we'll square it up. And I did do a dry fit with both springs, the diff and all the drive assembly to make sure that the space in between everything's going to line up. So that fitted really well as well. So now that I know I'll call it the half shaft is fitting, what I will do is, if we partially assemble this, put this way around. And then I'll keep that in place because that will hold this part here for gluing. And then I know it's going to be in line. If I try and glue that part on without all this connected and just do that, there's a chance this might be out of whack. So with the pin in, the suspension in, and then this on, that will hold this in the correct position for me to glue it on. So I'll do that next. So just while we're talking about the leaf springs, just highlight at some points. So these were just two halves, as similar to the front, joined together. There is also a bottom plate here with the two U-bolts, and they cleaned up okay. Generally, the fit of this was okay. However, on these cylinders here, in real life, these would just be a steel spacer, a bar or a tube to keep the things the right distance apart. But because they were two halves, these were almost cone shaped with a big gap in the middle. So once they were glued up, it was a case of filling. I used sprue glue actually for that. And then what I did was, I cut some strips of 600 and 1200 wet and dry paper, and then feeding them through like that. Grab the end. I don't want to do it because it's all finished now, but it was a case of pulling the thing through, the sandpaper through, with a bit of tension on it to sand it. So 2 or 3 passes with the 600 followed by the 1200 cleaned up very nicely. I also just used a bit of Tamiya extra thin, with most of it taken off, just to paint, I guess, where I'd been sanding, and that kind of melted and smoothed any rough spots. So from virtually a cone, or a double cone with a big gap in the middle, they've come up to not too bad as well. Okay, so with the braces glued up, we can now put these together and we'll get an idea of just what they look like. As you can see, there's very little the half shaft goes into the diff. But yeah, that's that. So now that the glue's had time to go off, we can pull this apart and then pull out the leaf spring. So what I'll do now is I'll go off camera and I'll clean up these joints. And then that just leaves these, I think maybe brake actuator cylinders on here. There's a couple of actuating rods to go on, and then that will be them ready for paint. So let me just clean these up, and then we'll come back and get the rest of the remainder of the parts glued on. Okay, so now that we've cleaned up the brackets, we can now get onto the last of the components attached to the assemblies. So if we do that now. So on these cylinders, there's little dimples, and there's little pegs on the positions. So we just need to make sure that we get this arm in the right orientation. Oops. Okay, you might be able to see there's little pegs on the ends of these, and that's for these rods here. But I'll do the other ones to give the glue time to go off in there. Okay, so that's that one. So what we'll do is we'll leave these to sit for a while to go off, and then we can come back to them. So on I have to make sure we get this the right way around. Try and match the diagram. So that sits that way. And again, you see there's a peg there, and we've got the hole there. So the best way to do this, let's have a think about this. I'm just trying to make sure they're vertical. There are very little connection points on them, so just compare against the drawing. So that's correct. So that's the differential finished. Just want to show you here. So this looks like it's a drawing from the actual manual, and it shows you can actually put in additional cables. Essentially from the arms on here onto these arms here, and then you could also put additional from the tops out, which would be forward. I was thinking about doing it, but I've decided against it because how we're going to paint and assemble later, it's going to be very difficult, and we'll touch on that shortly. But for this instance, I'm not going to do it. I'll just place this aside now. Hopefully it's. What I did also before is I've put in the U-bolts on the leaf springs in the bottom plate. So that was the last of the components for the leaf springs. So they're done now, ready for paint. So the next part to go on is this bracket here. Now the peg goes into a hole here, which I'll have to enlarge, I think. Again, there's a little dimple on there, and it fits onto that. And then there's a connection here that fits to the back side of that. So I might end up doing these off camera just because I need to get in close to see what I'm doing. But yeah, it's actually hard to just show it, but it will look something like that anyway, with that peg and the hole in the end, but I'll do that off camera. Okay, so that's the rods glued on. So I had to enlarge the holes a wee bit because there's a bit of flash on the little pegs, but they were so fine it was hard to clean them up without risking snapping them. So I just enlarged the hole a bit and then pushed them through a bit. So that's that. So the last thing that remains now is to attach your wheel hubs. Now, you've got a square peg, you might be able to make out, there's a little disc there. That actually goes, the peg obviously into the square, but that disc aligns with this area here. So they are actually handed. And then you see peg again onto that bit. That's unfinished, so I'll just put a dab of glue in there, and then that's as much as I can do. Now it's we'll be on to paint next. Okay, so here's all the parts ready for priming and colour coating. I've also just stuck these half shafts, just a drilled hole so I can hold them again. Also the universal joints, the green ones, these were the ones I did when I did the gearbox, but I'll make them the same colour, so the drive shaft, or the prop shaft, and the universal joints are all the same colour. What I also did was I've actually put together these. This is the main drive shaft, and then this one is from the power takeoff to the winch. But I jumped ahead because it's supposed to feed through that hole there. So I'm going to have to slice it, feed it through when the time comes to assemble everything, and then reattach it. So that was a bit of a mistake. Colour wise, again, Mr. Finishing Surfacer 1500 black, just the usual 60% thinners, 40% paint, and again the SMS lacquer olive drab for the top coat. So I'll go away and paint these up and then we'll come back. Okay, so that's just all painted up with the colour coats now. The finish came up pretty well. Again, my newbies I'm showing, I don't know if you can see, there's a faint seam line on the two halves of the diff. But, yeah, it was polished up really well, and I didn't think there was a seam line, but there is a slight one there. So that's that. And then we've got the universal joint here, it slips in. And that's that. The drive units. Now, a couple of issues with one of them. I think it's this one here, and it might come to bite me down the track, but I think this is the one where I put the two ends on the wrong way around. Putting them back together again, I think if you can get the angle right, you might see one slightly tilted compared to the other. So that is likely to go and throw the wheels out when it comes time to fix them, but we'll see what happens when it comes round. On the whole, the SMS paints, they sprayed on nicely again. Leaf springs. I think, I'm not sure if you can see, a slight seam line here. I mean, that's a third or twice I've filled that and sanded it back, but it just, and it looked okay even with the primer on, but it's came back again, so. But we just have to accept it. The finish in this one's relatively good. Quite happy with that one. And then we've got the bearing covers in the end. So, let's see if everything still fits up. These will have a specific orientation to them. Really pleased how these fit in here. Such a nice detail, that one. And then the diff. Yeah. That's it. Okay, thanks.